After weeks of preparation, the research team decided to open the skull cavity. The internal scans had already shown something unusual, a compact mass pressed deep within the cranial base. It wasn't bone, coral, or sand. To find out what it was, the team began a micro-excavation process under controlled conditions. Using fine tools, they slowly removed thin layers from inside the skull. What they uncovered left the room silent. At the center of the cavity, beneath centuries of dust, was a small clump of dark, fibrous material. Under magnification, it appeared to be a mixture of dried organic matter, possibly remnants of brain tissue, hair, and tiny mineral crystals. But mixed into it were microscopic fragments of metal, specifically lead shot, the kind used in 17th century muskets. The pattern of bone damage and embedded fragments revealed that the pirate had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, not from afar, but from close range. The bullet entered the temple, shattered bone, and lodged deep within. The wound had not healed, meaning it was likely the cause of death. Historians connected this to a common fate among pirates: executions, mutinies, or close combat aboard ships. The lead fragments matched the ammunition used by European naval forces of the time, suggesting this man may have died in a confrontation at sea, perhaps during a raid or capture. Inside this skull, scientists had found both the evidence of his final moment and the weapon that ended it. The pirate's story, frozen in bone, had finally revealed how he met his end. Once the cause of death was confirmed, scientists turned to the next question: who was he? Forensic specialists extracted trace DNA samples from the preserved inner bone, a difficult process after 4 centuries underwater. The fragments were fragile, but a small section of mitochondrial DNA survived. It revealed that the man was of European origin, most likely from the British Isles or Western France, both regions known for producing sailors, privateers, and pirates during the early 1600s. His genetic markers showed a diet rich in marine protein and salted meat, consistent with long months at sea. Using isotopic analysis, scientists compared mineral signatures in the bone to known regions of Europe. The readings closely matched Cornwall in England, a coastal area famous for its sailors and smugglers. This finding aligned perfectly with historical records from the same period. In 1612, a ship known as the Deliverance vanished near the Dominican coast. It was commanded by a British privateer named Captain William Harrow, who sailed under a false trade flag. Local archives later described a naval skirmish between Harrow's crew and a Spanish patrol, a battle that ended in fire and sinking wreckage. The skull, found only a few miles from the supposed battle site, could easily have belonged to one of Harrow's men. Though the name of the man remains lost to history, the evidence suggested he was part of that doomed voyage. A pirate who died in combat, far from home, his story buried beneath the sea for 4 centuries. Through his remains, the age of piracy had found its human face. The pirate skull now rests inside a temperature-controlled case at the Maritime History Museum in London. Visitors walk past it every day. Some pause, some stare, but few realize the extraordinary story behind that silent face. For scientists, it became far more than a relic. The skull offered the most detailed biological record of a pirate's life ever studied. It told a story of disease, violence, and survival, of how men endured months at sea, living on salted meat and stale water, exposed to infection, mercury-based medicine, and constant battle. The discovery also helped rewrite parts of medical history. The traces of early treatment inside the skull showed that pirates, often thought of as lawless and crude, had access to primitive but organized forms of shipboard surgery. Even in a world of chaos, there were attempts at healing. Archaeologists also learned new methods from the study. The preservation of tissue and metal fragments proved that seawater and coral can sometimes protect human remains better than soil, offering insight into how many more stories might still lie beneath the waves. But perhaps the most important lesson was human. 400 years later, the pirate's skull reminds us that every myth hides a real person, someone who laughed, fought, suffered, and died in a time when the ocean was both freedom and death. His bones tell a truth no legend can replace, that behind every black flag was a beating heart, and behind every skull and crossbones, once there was a man. For centuries ago, the Caribbean was a violent place. Ships clashed under black flags, gunpowder filled the air, and death often came from hunger, disease, or the blade of another man. In those days, pirates ruled the waves, but their world was harsh, and few survived long enough to leave a mark on history. Until now, deep below the ocean, near what was once a pirate trade route, divers discovered something extraordinary, a human skull preserved inside a coral tomb. Scientists later confirmed it dated back over 400 years, likely belonging to a pirate from the early 1600s. But when they brought it to the surface and opened it for study, what they found inside was completely unexpected. This was not just another bone relic. Inside this skull were hidden clues to how these men lived, fought, and died, and to the silent diseases that spread through their crews. What began as a simple archaeological find soon turned into a medical mystery that changed what we know about pirate life forever. This is that story of the skull that spoke after 400 years. The story of this pirate skull began far from any museum, deep in the turquoise waters of the Caribbean, near the coast of what is now the Dominican Republic. In 2019, a small team of marine archaeologists was surveying an old wreck site believed to be part of a 17th-century pirate vessel. The area was known to locals as La Boca del Diablo, the Devil's Mouth, a stretch of sea where countless ships disappeared during storms. At first, the divers expected to find only wood, iron, and fragments of pottery. But then, under a thick mat of coral, one diver's torch caught the edge of something smooth and pale. It was a skull, perfectly sealed within limestone-like coral growth, untouched for centuries. Around it, the divers also found broken pistol parts, a rusted belt buckle, and a fragment of fabric, likely from an old uniform or coat. When the artifact was raised and sent to the surface, the team realized they were holding more than a simple relic. Carbon dating confirmed the bone was around 400 years old, matching the golden age of Caribbean piracy. The skull showed signs of healed wounds and a deep fracture near the temple, the kind that could have come from a musket strike or flying shrapnel. But the real mystery wasn't on the surface. Scans revealed something inside the skull cavity, compacted material that didn't belong there. It wasn't coral, sand, or bone dust. It was something else. This find would soon travel thousands of miles to a European lab, where scientists hoped to uncover what lay hidden within. What they found next would reveal one of the most chilling truths about pirate life in the 1600s. The skull arrived at the Maritime History Research Center in London, where scientists began a careful process of cleaning and imaging. Every fragment was photographed, measured, and scanned using high-resolution CT technology. The goal was simple: to understand who this man was and how he died. At first glance, the skull told a familiar story. The bone was thick and weathered, typical of a man who lived a rough life under the sun. The teeth were worn down, several missing entirely. One molar showed clear signs of infection, something common among sailors who lacked proper nutrition and hygiene. But it was the inside that caught everyone's attention. When the 3D scans were processed, researchers saw traces of an unusual substance deep within the cranial cavity. It looked like compacted dust mixed with crystalline fragments. The texture was unlike sediment or coral, more like dried biological material. Further testing confirmed it contained traces of human tissue, along with chemical markers of mercury, lead, and arsenic, toxic elements used in early medicine. These were not natural deposits. They were remnants of treatment. It suggested that before this man died, he might have been suffering from illness, possibly syphilis, a disease rampant among seafarers in the 1600s. The discovery opened new questions. Was this pirate treated by a ship's surgeon, or was he part of an early medical experiment at sea? The team realized this skull wasn't just about battle or violence. It was evidence of the dark medical world that existed aboard pirate ships. As scientists continued their examination, the skull began to reveal small but powerful details about its owner's life. The bone structure suggested the man was in his mid-30s, old for a pirate. Life at sea was brutal, and most men didn't live past their 20s. His jaw was strong, his eye sockets deep, and the thick ridge along the forehead indicated years of physical strain. The teeth told their own story. They were filed down unevenly, showing signs of constant use, cracking nuts, opening bottles, even cutting ropes. 2 molars showed evidence of abscesses, and the surrounding bone carried marks of infection that had spread to the jaw. Traces of iron were found near the gums, likely from rusted nails or utensils pirates often used to pick their teeth, a dangerous habit that often caused deadly infections. But it wasn't just the mouth. Small healed fractures on the skull's right side suggested he had once survived a head injury, possibly from a sword or blunt weapon. Such trauma was common in brawls or naval battles. Scientists also found a high concentration of carbon and sulfur in the bone, likely from long exposure to gunpowder smoke and burning tar. It confirmed he had lived and worked close to the cannons, perhaps as a gunner or a deckhand. Every mark added another piece to the puzzle. This wasn't just a random sailor. This was a man shaped by the harsh world of piracy, hunger, violence, and primitive medicine. The skull had become a map, a record of everything he had endured before his final voyage.